Hi, warriors. It is my pleasure to introduce Filipino Heritage Month. Let's start with some fun facts. Filipinos are the second largest Asian group in the United States. Did you know that Tagalog is one of the top 5 languages spoken at Aloha High School? Also, did you know that the yo-yo was made popular in the United States by a Filipino? Pedro Flores is considered to be the man responsible for the invention of the yo-yo. Born in the Philippines, Flores came to the United States in 1915, where he attended the High School of Commerce in San Francisco. After graduating high school, he went on to study law at UC Berkeley and the Hastings College of Law. Flores decided to drop out of school and moved to Santa Barbara, California, where he eventually started his life as an inventor of the yo-yo. While working as a bellboy, Flores came across an article about a self-made millionaire who profited off selling a ball attached to a rubber band, which reminded Flores of the battledore, a toy that has been played for hundreds of years in the Philippines. Flores saw the market opportunity in the United States, and between the years of 1929 and 1932, he started and ran the yo-yo manufacturing company in Santa Barbara, California, before selling the company and trademark. More fun facts. 1/5 of Filipino Americans identify as multicultural. Tagalog is the most commonly spoken language after English and Spanish in California. Here are some great Filipino-American books that I encourage you to check out. Somewhere in the Middle, A Journey to the Philippines in Search of Roots, Belonging, and Identity. Half Filipino, but raised in an American household, Debra Francisco Douglas has always longed to know more about her Filipino heritage. So when a thick government-issued envelope arrived at her door announcing her assignment to the Philippines as a Peace Corps volunteer, she snatched the opportunity and set out on a journey of self-discovery, travel, and adventure. Arriving in the mountain town of Baguio City, Philippines, she was introduced to a life of obnoxious roosters, bucket baths, and kids shouting her name every time she walked down the street. Despite her attempts to get involved in the community, her desire for belonging and identity did not materialize as quickly as planned. Realizing that Filipino time means nothing ever happens in a hurry, Debra braces for the journey ahead, hoping to find answers, and above all, to find herself. Filled with warmth and humor, Somewhere in the Middle captures the simple joy found in ordinary moments and in the people we share our lives with, shedding new light on what it truly means to find the place where you belong. Whether you're hoping to unearth your own cultural roots, volunteer abroad, or find your next travel adventure, this memoir offers inspiration for all those yearning to discover who they are and where they belong in the world. The Oracles, My Filipino Grandparents in America. Written by Filipino-American Patty Navalta Poblete, this memoir describes the life of Patty growing up in a California neighborhood and the cultural clash she experiences when her Filipino grandparents immigrate to America and begin to live in Patty's house. She reflects on the mix of Filipino and American cultural values that make up her life and what that means for her own identity as a second-generation Filipino-American. The House That Lou Built. Written by Filipino-American May Respicio, this book takes place in the Bay Area of California. The main character, Lou Bolosan Nelson, is a middle school girl who lives in a cramped home with her mom and Lola. As an exemplary student in woodworking class, she dreams of building her own tiny house on the land that was given to her when her father died. This tiny house would give her and her mom their own home, as well as the freedom she has long desired. When she discovers that her family's financial situation is becoming more strained, Lou pushes on to build the house before the time runs out. Now let's learn about the Filipino-American War.
The history of American imperialism dates back as far as the founding fathers do, when Thomas Jefferson stated that he was waiting for the fall of the Spanish Empire until our population can be sufficiently advanced to gain it from them piece by piece. When Mexico successfully gained its independence, it wasn't long before the U.S. found the American Southwest in its hands after a war with the new country. Nearly 50 years later, after the U.S. successfully defeated Spain in 1898, Jefferson's prophecy would once again come into play. One of the results of the Spanish-American War was that several Spanish colonies fell into American hands. Two of these were Cuba and the Philippines. And while the U.S. made it clear that it wouldn't keep Cuba, the story of the Philippines was a bit different. Hi everyone, Thought Monkey here. Today I'll be talking about the Philippine-American War. The Philippines is a nation made up of many islands. During the age of exploration in the 16th century, the Portuguese explorer Ferdinand Magellan arrived on the islands and claimed them for Spain. Over the next 400 years, the Filipino people were subjugated to the rule of Spain, which had some ups and a lot of downs. Even before the U.S. went to war with Spain and took possession of the Philippines, Filipino revolutionaries had already been struggling for independence from the big, bad Spanish Empire. And while at first many of them believed that the Americans were coming to liberate them from Spanish rule, it was clear that when they didn't allow the general of the revolutionary forces, Emilio Aguinaldo, and his troops to march to Manila alongside American troops, that the U.S. had other ideas in mind. In October of 1898, a conference was held to determine the fate of the Philippines. The Americans were given three choices: to hand the islands back to Spain, to give the Philippines its independence, or to annex the territories. While many anti-imperialist Americans were against annexation and quoted President Lincoln when he said, "No man is good enough to govern another man without the other's consent," the fact is that those in power held a different view of the Philippines. President William McKinley believed that it was God's will for Americans to uplift and civilize and Christianize them, and believed that they were unfit for self-government. And finally, he believed that it would leave a power vacuum of which Germany or other rival countries may be quick to fill. On February 6, 1899, a treaty to annex went before the U.S. and passed by one vote. The Philippines now belong to the Americans. While the treaty was passed in the U.S., the Filipino revolutionaries were not quite happy with the idea. Fighting quickly erupted, and by June 2, 1899, the First Philippine Republic officially declared war against the United States. The war lasted 3 years, and the U.S. found victory. The Philippines were devastated by the war as it caused a breakdown in its infrastructure, causing hunger, disease, and displacement. Ultimately, an estimated 34,000 to 220,000 Filipinos were either injured or killed. The Roman Catholic Church was de-established as a state church, and English became the primary language among the government, business, and education. While the official war was over, fighting between different revolutionary groups in the Philippines and American forces continued for more than 10 years. The issue was not necessarily that the U.S. wasn't going to grant the Filipinos independence, but more about when and under what conditions. In July of 1902, the Philippine Organic Act stated that upon peace, a legislative government would be created containing a lower house, which would be popularly elected by Filipinos, and an upper house, which would be appointed by the President of the United States. At home in the U.S., the public tended to consider the annexation of the Philippines as expensive and something that brought little profit. Moreover, Teddy Roosevelt said as early as 1901 that he wanted the Philippines to be able to self-govern, and by 1907 he said that he was ready to figure out a way to give the islands their independence. By 1916, the Jones Act was passed, promising the eventual independence of the islands and created an elected Philippine Senate. And in the 1919 presidential election, Woodrow Wilson stated that his intention was to deprive ourselves of that frontier, the Philippines. In 1934, another act was signed promising Filipino independence in 10 years, but because of World War II, there was a 2-year delay, and the United States finally granted the Philippines independence in 1946. The question remains, however, did the U.S. do the right thing when it annexed the Philippines over 100 years ago? If the Philippines hadn't been annexed, would they have been colonized by another global player? Who really knows? If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to stay updated with the latest Thought Monkey video. Thank you.
Now let's take a look at more recent Filipino-American history. Have you heard about the Filipino farm workers' role in the Great Grape Strike of 1965 in Delano, California? Filipino immigrants to the United States have have a unique history that not many have had the opportunity to learn. Filipino workers who immigrated to the US had an immense amount of adaptability, resilience, and perseverance. These characteristics became most evident when they formed community organizing groups in the fight for civil and economic rights. Their efforts have added significant contributions to the farm worker labor movement, and their stories offer us inspiration and pride in the history of Filipinos in America. What was the Delano grape strike? Of the many challenges Filipinos fought against for better working conditions and pay, the Delano grape strike is the most famous, led by Larry Itliong. Larry was born in the Philippines and immigrated to the United States at the age of 15 and participated in his first strike a year after. Despite moving to the US just after completing the 6th grade to work as a child laborer, Itliong was intelligent and knew many Filipino languages, as well as Spanish, Japanese, and Cantonese. Itliong worked on farms in Seattle, Washington as a child, and later on worked in Alaskan salmon canneries before moving to California in the 1930s. In 1965, unrest was growing in the area of Delano, California, which is known for its numerous grape vineyards. Migrant farm workers expressed discontent and frustration over the low wages offered to grape pickers. Larry Itliong, a Filipino leader from Stockton, had been organizing Filipino workers to get more involved in civil rights and fight for fair working conditions. He began organizing Filipino workers to conduct a grape strike and urged community members to support the farm laborers in their fight for better conditions. On September 7, 1965, Filipino workers gathered at Filipino Hall and voted to go on strike. The very next day, they set down their tools and walked out of the fields. Itliong then approached Cesar Chavez, a well-known leader in the farm worker movement, to convince him that the Mexican Union needed to join the Filipino Union in order for the strike to be successful. After some deliberation, Chavez agreed, knowing that it would be better to join forces than ignore the strike. With both Filipino and Mexican workers collaborating together, they formed what is now known as the United Farm Workers. Well, what finally happened? The strike attracted a lot of attention and support from activists, human rights groups, other unions, and students. Then, the United Farm Workers managed to institute a national grape boycott, which meant that growers would be unable to sell their products. After 5 long years of the grape boycott, growers finally gave into the demands of the United Farm Workers and signed the new contracts. Filipino farm workers played a pivotal role in the labor movement and paved the way for future generations of Filipinos. Without the courage of Filipinos to fight for their rights and working conditions, the Delano grape strike and the ensuing victory might never have taken place. It is interesting that the history of Larry Itliong and the Filipino workers of Delano are not well known, even to most young Filipino Americans. Fortunately, recent efforts have been made to share that history and spread awareness of the story of Filipino immigration. In fact, the governor of California signed legislation that requires public schools in California to teach the history of Filipino workers and their role in the grape strike. Governor Brown also signed a bill that recognizes October 25th as Larry Itliong Day. Thelma Buchholz. She was a Filipino-American community activist, historian, public speaker, author, as well as the first female Filipino-American legislature in the U.S. and the first Filipino-American elected to the U.S. legislative body in which the constituency was less than 3% Asian American. Buchholz was born in the Philippines and moved to the U.S. at the age of 15, where she attended and received a Bachelor of Arts degree in zoology in 1956 from Mount St. Mary's College in Los Angeles, California, with the help of her uncles. She continued to go to school at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and later on at the District of Columbia School of Law in Washington, D.C., where she earned her Juris Doctor along with her husband. Bucholt's political career started in the late 1960s when she became a member of the Ad Hoc Committee of Young Democrats. In 1969, she attended a conference by the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C. Her political career really started to move forward when 1972 Democratic Party presidential nominee George McGovern hired her to be the Alaska coordinator for his presidential campaign. In 1974, Bucholt was elected as an ad hoc Democrat to the Alaska House of Representatives and continued to be re-elected to the Alaskan legislature until 1980. Christetta Comfort is the first Asian and the first female White House executive chef. And here are a few Filipino-American celebrity quotations. Don't expect a pat on the back for merely doing your job, but know that you'll get one for doing it exceptionally well. Leah Salonga is an actress and singer that is the voice of many Disney princesses, including Jasmine and Mulan. I'm ambitious in the sense that I raise the bar high for myself. Darren Criss is an actor and singer best known for his role in Glee. That's all for today, folks. So why don't you take a moment and turn to a neighbor and share one thing that stood out to you from this presentation. Have a great day, warriors.